I am a Christian and you're a Muslim, and this is probably going to be challenging for some people to even watch to start with. And our ability to sit down, have a civil conversation, a lot of what we think out there and know out there, say that this is impossible. The Muslim faith teaches that you effectively annihilate the infidels because anybody who doesn't practice or believe what you do should get rid of them. When we talk to you as a professor who practices the faith, you're like, not at all, not even close.
The Quran is very clear about this. It is a complete misreading, whether it's deliberate or otherwise, to say this is a religion that tells people to go out and fight. This is a book that says people have the right to defend themselves. ISIS and these groups, they're not part of our faith. Yeah. Muslim leaders and scholars have been saying they violate the fundamental principles of this religion. They are not part of us. But the problem is there's media and political discourse that frame them as representatives of Islam and Muslims. The displacement of 2 million people. The destruction of almost all of their homes, all of their hospitals, all of their schools, all of their universities, all of their churches, and most of their mosques. Who does this? Is this something that God allows for? Absolutely not. This is satanic practice. There is not a history of Muslim anti-Semitism. Anywhere in the Muslim world, Jewish people and Christian people were able to live in peace and security because of covenants of the Prophet Muhammad, which said it doesn't matter if you continue to follow Judaism, you continue to follow Christianity, fine. We agree that everybody is entitled to be safe from the hands of everybody else. There's no issue with us coexisting. If we can agree on that, we can coexist. Without any issue.
Good morning.
Morning.
Halim Rane, did I say that correctly?
You did.
You are a university professor at Griffith, an academic. You have taught for the last 20 years. Welcome to my show. This is called the Emeka Conversations. And I think you are my 7th guest since we started. So that's really cool. I've invited you to my show today because something really interesting happened over the last little while. As many people know, we had the the occurrence at Bondi Beach in Sydney, where a number of extremists and radicals just went on a bit of a shooting spree, and sadly a number of lives were lost in that process, which was really quite not just disappointing and sad, horrific for a lot of people. I shot a quick react video, which I normally do as part of what I do on the Emeka Unscripted platform. And in that video, I articulated a number of things. And one of those things was around the fact that, the Muslim religion largely advocates, to me, up until what I'd known till that point, largely advocates these horrific things that we see, these acts of terrorists. And I have a work colleague who's worked with me for the last nearly 6 years. And through that mutual colleague, he actually connected me to you. And he pulled me out and he said, hey, man, I think some of the things you've said there may not be accurate, may not actually be truly just or representative of reality. But would you mind having a conversation with someone who might be really quite educated on that front? And so I took the opportunity, and I was greatly surprised and blown away by the conversation we had. And it was an hour conversation, I think it was, but I felt like that was one of the briefest conversations where I got downloaded with a whole bunch of knowledge and information and data. And so I felt really strongly about inviting you to the podcast so we can have a conversation, because the platform is about education, enlightenment, and empowerment. And the information you provided me really went a long way in educating me on things I didn't know. And I've grown up with a series of understanding, belief systems that I've held that is largely based on what education I've gained through just existing here on Earth. And most of the audience, they tend to gain their education through just existing, whether it's through their church that they go to, the media, what their local politician says, their families, and all that sort of stuff. And largely that can contribute towards a significant level of ignorance. And so I invited you to the show to assist me with that education, enlightenment piece. And as an educator yourself, who is a published author, you're a man who has a wealth of knowledge. So I wanted you to really be able to speak to the audience there with a series of questions that I had for you. And so I guess to kind of introduce you to the audience in a more proper form, tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your journey. And there is a very clear fact here I wanted to mention. I am a Christian and you're a Muslim. And this is probably going to be challenging for some people to even watch to start with, on that fact that we can both sit in the room and have a very civil conversation, which a lot of what we think out there and know out there should say that this is impossible.
Yeah.
But it is.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do and why you're even here.
Sure. Well, I mean, I grew up in Australia. I'm fourth generation in my family, born here, of Indian and European heritage. My grandfather was an imam. In fact, he was the first imam of Queensland.
Wow.
He was the imam of the Holland Park Mosque, which is the oldest mosque on the east coast of Australia, built in 1908. He was the imam there for about 40 years. He's passed away now. So my family, has always been Muslim. But I wanted to learn about the religion in a deeper way. So after high school, I went and did my academic studies at the International Islamic University in Malaysia, where I did my degrees in Islamic revealed knowledge and heritage and sociology and anthropology. I returned back to Australia. In fact, I met my wife over there. We married, and our first child was born over in Malaysia.
Yeah.
And moved back to Australia. I now have 3 children and 3 grandchildren and almost the 4th grandchild on the way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Being a grandfather the 4th time?
Yeah, I know. And so when we returned back to Australia, I did my master's degree in media and communications. In my undergraduate years, I became very interested in just how much of a powerful influence media has on the way people think about other people and the world, various events and things. And I think that is going to lean towards answering the question that you asked. But then after that, I worked for a while doing, social and media research, qualitative and quantitative analysis. And then I took a job with the Department of Immigration and Multicultural Affairs. I did that for about 5 years. But it was during that period that I wanted to go back to university and do a PhD. So I did PhD in international relations in peace and conflict studies, and I focused specifically on the Israel-Palestine conflict.
Okay.
I did my field work over in Israel and Palestine. And then as soon as I finished my thesis, Griffith University offered me a position because they wanted to start offering Islamic studies.
Okay.
So they asked me if I would design some courses and teach them and, embark on a research program in the area. So I accepted, and so I've been with Griffith ever since. I've also previously taught at UQ and at Bond University as well. But so I've been at Griffith since 2008.
Wow, you're a veteran there.
Yeah. So my main focus of my research is covenants in Islam, and I have a new book. This one, Covenants with Allah, Keystone of Islam. Yeah. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about that. I think it relates a lot to what we're talking about today. So that's one of my key focuses. But I also write about, religious extremism. A lot of my work relates to the sociology of religion. And I've done a lot of research on Muslim communities in the West, including Muslim communities in Australia. We did a big study in 2019 called the Islam in Australia study we've published a lot in relation to that as well. Okay. So that's my main sort of work that I do. Yeah,
that's an incredibly vast wealth of experience and knowledge that you've acquired over time. And I felt like that was really, really important for people to know leading into this conversation, just for the simple fact that in our current climate, with some of the things that have occurred, there are so many misconceptions about the Islamic faith, what it means, what it says, who the Prophet Muhammad is. And I want to make it really clear that this conversation is not an attempt to try and convert you towards Christianity, and it's not an attempt for you to try and convert me towards the Muslim faith. It's about two humans that bleed blood, regardless of where we came from in the world, and our ability to sit down, have a civil conversation, and understand each other. Because the fundamental truth is that humanity cannot survive or even thrive if there is an infinite number of conflicts happening that is not conducive for the long-term sustainability of humanity. If we can find a common ground, a place where we can live in peace with each other and serve the God who's created us and wants us to do the right thing by each other and live to serve him and his will, then we will sustain to whatever the purposes are that he has for our lives. So I felt that was important for people to understand your background as we delve into this conversation. I would say, I often forget to say it early in the piece, that people should subscribe and follow and all that really good stuff for more of this kind of conversations in the future. Whoever you are, wherever you're watching, do that now so you don't forget. But let's get into it for today. Emeka Unscripted exists to ask the questions others won't, and to do it honestly. If this content educates, enlightens, or empowers you, consider supporting us on Patreon. Your support keeps these conversations independent, thoughtful, and alive. So knowing your background, as I mentioned, one of the things, so what occurred was I had this video that I'd recorded. It went on Instagram, and my colleague at work pulled me aside and said, hey, I think some of the things you've said, there might be a bit ignorant, and you're not an ignorant person. Well, any person can be ignorant, right? Because ignorance is like the lack of knowledge, right? So if you don't have knowledge, you tend to fill in the gaps with the little that you do know, or that you believe, or that you've been told, right? So I very happily did that. And so he pulled me aside, and I was grateful for that. And one of the things that I suppose really shocked me when we had that conversation is a lot of historical context that has clearly establishes that something I said, which was the Muslim faith is one that teaches that you are to effectively annihilate the infidels, because anybody who doesn't practice or believe what you do or not a part of your faith, then the Muslim faith at large teaches that you should get rid of them. When we talked as a professor, as an educated fellow who practices the faith, you're like, not at all, not even close. So there was some very interesting historical context that you gave me there, and context even within the book's framework of the book, the Quran, which is your holy book, that I didn't know, and that a lot of people don't know. And people can sometimes passionately describe what they do know as facts, which is, it's not facts at all. So let's start there, shall we? What are, in your view, you've seen the common misconceptions that the West has about the Islamic faith, which is that you are a tyrannical faith, and the precipice of who you are and what you stand for is that anybody who isn't you must not have the right to leave. What is your stance to that? Rather the start.
Okay, a lot of that narrative about Islam being a civilizational enemy, Muslims having an inherent kind of hatred for non-Muslims and all of that. I mean, some of that is part of, historical rhetoric. Some of it's part of contemporary political rhetoric. It doesn't line up with what you can read for yourself in the Quran, for example, and what you can study for yourself if you engage in investigation of history, of the facts. Let's take the Quran, for example. The Quran is a book that Muslims believe to be revealed by God to the Prophet Muhammad through the angel Gabriel over a approximately 2-decade period between 610 and 632. The idea of the Quran is that God has continuously provided human beings with guidance on how to exist and coexist on Earth. Earth is our domain where we get to demonstrate to ourselves and everybody else, what kind of a person are we? What is our worth? Because in the Islamic conception, I think in the Christian conception too, there's the idea of living on the earth and then there's an afterlife. And in the afterlife, it's an eternal life, and the destination is either heaven or hell. So it's a very high stakes situation. But we understand God, and I think in Christianity also, God is understood to be just and merciful.
Yeah.
So a just and merciful God tells you about the terms and conditions for your life on earth. And that's what, my new book is about, this book about covenants with Allah, the keystone of Islam. And I'll come to what that keystone bit means in a moment, but let's just stay on point here. So God provides us through revelation, and God has continuously provided this divine guidance to human beings through various messengers throughout history. Adam being the first, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, all of these are human beings who have been, and by the way, Adam is unique in a certain sense, and Jesus is unique in a certain sense. We believe that as well as Muslims. Okay. But they've all received guidance, and they've conveyed this to human beings about there's only one God.
Yeah.
God has created you and everybody else and everything. You are accountable to God. You've come from God, and you'll go back to God. While you're here on earth, it is incumbent on you to behave and act in a certain way. Yeah. And that ultimately pertains to how you treat other people. Okay. So these are the broad principles. I think we all agree on that, right? So the Quran is outlining, like other revealed scriptures, what the terms and conditions are. What are God's expectations? What are our obligations? What are the rights and responsibilities of people? Effectively, what it's saying is, how should we treat other human beings, and how should they treat us? Yeah. It's about our coexistence. Yeah. Okay. So this is what is understood in our religion, I think in Christianity to a large extent as well, as the covenants.
Yes.
We have a covenant as human beings, covenant with God. Yeah. God has made covenants with the prophets. God has made covenants with particular groupings or nations of human beings, like, for example, the covenant with the children of Israel. Worship only God. Establish prayer, give charity, look after your parents and your relatives and the needy people. Don't speak ill words of other people. And don't drive people from their homes nor kill people. I mean, this is stated very explicitly in the Quran in the 2nd chapter, verses 83 and 84, for example. But there's many verses of the Quran that talk about covenants.
Yeah.
And so essentially what covenants do is they organize how we should live on earth with other people. So the idea in Islam is not that everybody has to believe, ideally, if people adopted these beliefs, the likelihood that they may adhere and live by the will of God is increased.
Yeah.
But at a minimum, everybody should be safe from the hand of everybody else. Why do we have revelation? Why do we have prophets? It's because God also made a commitment to us, and that commitment was to provide guidance to human beings all throughout our history. Yeah. So on the day of judgment, there can't be any excuse.
Yes.
Right?
As to why you didn't.
We can't say we didn't know what the terms and conditions were of our life on earth, and so we can be judged justly and fairly.
Yeah.
Because we do know what's expected of us. We do know it's wrong to kill people. We do know it's wrong to steal, etc. and so forth. All of those basic principles we agree on. So, but we know with every people, there's always going to be people who have very low levels of religious literacy. Yes. They may ostensibly be a Muslim or a Christian or a Hindu, whatever, but it doesn't mean that they actually really have a deep understanding of the religion. It doesn't mean that they're a good person. To be that upright person that every religion requires of us requires substantial amount of effort. It requires a God consciousness. It requires self-discipline. It requires restraining those natural human instincts or desires that we have at different levels in order to be the best person we can be as a work colleague, as a husband, as a wife, as a child, as a parent, as a neighbor, and so forth. And we all accomplish that to varying degrees, right? So just because someone says they're a Muslim doesn't mean that they've actually attained the kinds of qualities that is expected if you're going to be, real Muslim. Yeah. Just because someone says they're a Christian, same deal. Absolutely. Hindu, same deal.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but the issue we're talking about here is that we have political discourses and media discourses and even some, academic discourses engaging with this narrow lens on some people and making them the representatives of Islam. And the people they're focusing on are terrorists, are violent extremists, are criminals, and they're saying, oh, these are the Muslims, this is Islam. I mean, this is utterly ridiculous.
Well, that leads me...
I mean, as an academic, you could not write a paper or submit a thesis and expect to get a passing grade with that kind of analysis. It's so flawed. It's ridiculous.
Well, I mean, the sad thing is that I guess most people in our natural world aren't academics that have any level of understanding that you have to be able to deeply understand a topic to make any kind of comment on it. I mean, you look at even journalism these days. There used to be a great emphasis on that. If you're going to tell a story, then that story is true, factual, and so on and so forth. And if you didn't, there was a governing body that will come for you, right? And academics bear that same, which is why it gets vetted by, even when you wrote your book, you would have had it peer-reviewed. It would have had to go through several detailed level of analysis, but we don't really have that. And social media has made that even much worse. I mean, a guy like me, I'm relatively educated. I think I like to give that put in that disclaimer just in case of like you only have like 2 degrees. I mean, I have more, but come down. I don't know about everything, but I even can comment on things that I really have little to no information on. So, okay, I wanted to put that aside, which is responsible largely for what we have seen that is being spread through the West and other parts of the world as what a person of the Islamic faith is and looks like. So there's something that you said, and that ties nicely to kind of one of the majoring thoughts of who Muslims are. And that is, you mentioned something that is said in your word, in the Quran, which was around not driving people from their home or killing them, right? And you say that is a big part of, well, I guess if you look at the Bible, like we look at the 10 Commandments, that's one of our no-nos, right? From the way you articulated it there as well. So I wanted you to dive a little bit deeper into that specific understanding of the word, and why there is such a large misconception around it. Because, for example, what I said was, well, I guess you can expect these from the Muslims because, as you can see, their word says that they should be doing this. And you're like, well, no. It doesn't say that at all. It says quite the opposite. Delve into that for me a little bit more.
I mean, no one can deny that there have been people who call themselves Muslims or claim to act under the banner of Islam who have gone out and violated those rules, those prohibitions. But that doesn't mean that Islam allows for that. Yeah, they have violated the covenant. They have violated the prohibition that's explicitly stated in the Quran and in the example of the Prophet Muhammad. Yeah. But if we are engaging here in a discussion about what Islam is, then we have to go to the main source, which is the Quran. If we look at the Quran, for example, we can see that in every occasion where it talks about the use of armed force, there's a context here. And the context is usually one of two things. It's either self-defense, and all of the verses that talk about this are in the context of the Muslim community after the migration from Mecca to Medina, being in a state of conflict with the Prophet's tribe, which is the Quraysh tribe. And they were polytheists. The Muslims had adopted a religion, Islam, which is monotheistic, right? Yeah. Okay. But the other main context here that I think most people miss is that the Quraysh had and others had violated their covenant. Either they had violated the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, or they violated a covenant that came before that, which was the Constitution of Medina. So if you're reading, for example, the 8th and 9th chapters of the Quran, the context of these chapters is the violation of the Constitution of Medina or the violation of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. What is the implication here? The implication is that these are people, often leaders of a group, that from whom others are not safe from their hand. Yeah. They're prepared to violate peace and security, putting at risk the lives of other people. And against this sort of people, you've got no choice but to fight against them. And this is the context of the Quran. But the Quran is not saying go out and fight every people who is a polytheist or go out and fight even all of the Quraysh tribe. What those verses are very clearly stating is that fight those who are fighting against you. Fight those who don't have any regard for the sanctity of life.
Yeah.
But those people who keep their treaty, you must keep your treaty with them. Those people who come to you seeking protection, you must give them protection. So the Quran is very clear about this. It is a complete misreading, whether it's deliberate or otherwise. It's a misreading of the Quran to say this is a religion that tells people to go out and fight. That this is not the case. This is a book that says people have the right to defend themselves.
Yeah.
And that if you make a peace treaty with someone, treaties and covenants are about establishing accountability, certainty, and trust. Someone breaks it, it means that, there's an accountability issue here.
Yeah.
The certainty that you're safe from them is now destroyed, right? Yeah. And the trust that you have that you're protected from them is now, in ruins.
Yes.
So this is the context that needs to be understood. But those people, Muslim or otherwise, who would say, "Oh, we have a right to go and kill the infidels" or whatever the thing is, I mean, this is absolutely and completely wrong. And in fact, a lot of the research on these groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS shows that the people who join them have very low levels of religious literacy. But the other key point here when it comes to these groups is that they've been completely disavowed by Muslims. It was only this week that the ANIC, the Australian National Imams Council, completely disavowed ISIS and said they have nothing to do with Islam. They're not an Islamic group. I mean, this is not new. I mean, for years, Muslim leaders and scholars have been saying this is not a group that represents Islam. They violate the fundamental principles of this religion. They are not part of us. And there's a whole lot of other people that say, actually, their origins are so dubious, we don't even know really where they came from. And the roots of them that we can see are with various, intelligence or agencies from different countries as well. So they're not trusted by Muslims. They're not considered to be part of the religion. But the problem is that there's media and political discourse that frame them as representatives of Islam and Muslims. And this is the problem.
Well, something I said I then consequently shot a second video where I talked about the fact that I do not want to be part of any voice that continues to sow further discord and ruins peace amongst the people that you are to coexist with, which is effectively anyone who is another human, right? Yeah. So I feel that there is a large historical context that's perhaps missing that has driven largely the narrative of the idea that most people have absorbed and understand and almost now not just agree with. They think that that's what the central of it is, which is that you have a large population of Muslims, and you see them all around the world now, that they have there is a book, there is something they're following that says that this aggressive mindset of come in, take over, have a coordinated cleanse, and they point to Muhammad as the prophet who is effectively inspired that kind of behavior and attitude. And in our conversation, you led me to understand that there is a history there that has actually largely perpetuated that. And it's even connected to a book that most will even reference to almost, and take that book almost as seriously as they do what the Quran says, which I had a friend who called me yesterday and was talking to me about it. And he was saying to me things that, he's like, did you know that the Quran says this, this, and this? And as I said, I did quick ChatGPT of exactly what he asked and what he was stating. And ChatGPT says, actually, Quran doesn't say that, but this other book called the Hadith says that. So there's a historical context around that. Can you shed some light for me around what that historical context is, how it is impacted and created a significant framing for what a lot of people believe now of the Islamic tradition to be?
Right. So the Quran is the the primary preeminent source of Islam. It is from the time of the Prophet Muhammad. It's the words that he spoke to the people around him that were inspired to him by God through the angel Gabriel.
Sure.
So it's Muslims would consider this the verbatim word of God.
Yeah.
This, what you refer to as that.
So can I ask, in its entirety, is it, so in the Bible we have poetry, we have history, we have directions, we have letters.
Yeah.
In it, would you say in its entirety that's what it is?
In its entirety. Okay. It's the entire record of the revelations, the utterances, the inspirations that Prophet Muhammad received, and he conveyed between that period, between 610 when the revelation started and his death in 632. The order in which you read the book is the order that he organized it, but it's not the chronological order of when this takes place.
Sure.
So the Quran is divided into chapters. There's 114 chapters, and every chapter is comprised of verses. Some have more verses than others. Some have, a few verses. Some have hundreds of verses. Okay. So they can be longer or shorter.
Yeah.
And they're organized. Yeah. I wouldn't compare the Quran to the Bible.
Sure.
It's distinctly different in many ways. The Bible is perhaps more similar to the Hadith in some ways.
Okay.
The Hadith is written down hundreds of years after the time of the Prophet Muhammad.
Okay.
In fact, the Prophet Muhammad discouraged the writing down of anything other than the Quran, okay, and attributing that to him. But this is what the Hadith effectively is. It's descriptions, words, sayings attributed to the Prophet Muhammad.
Yeah.
Now, Muslims know that there's been a huge problem historically with these narrations. There were a lot of political divisions and so forth between the Muslims, and the way to get one point of view above another was to sort of claim this is from the Prophet. And this resulted in the proliferation of a lot of what are referred to as hadith, but a lot of inauthentic ones. And so many of the earlier scholars were refrained from referring to them because of this problem of inauthenticity, okay, of weak narrations. But a lot of what you might find to be descriptions that are disparaging of the Prophet, that paint Islam as a religion of violence and so forth, often come from the Hadith. Okay. So, there are a lot of people who rely very heavily on the Hadith.
Yes.
And that's something that's occurred in modern times, where the Hadith have been promoted as a very important source of the religion. Mm. But there's a lot of others who are very careful and just cautious in relation to the Hadith because of these problems about authenticity. Yeah. So let's put the Hadith aside for a second. I think we need to return to fully answer your previous question, which is about how this religion regards other people of other faiths and people of no faith.
Yes.
The point of the Quran is that there's no compulsion in religion. The Prophet Muhammad is commanded in the Quran not to compel anybody to accept his message. And it's also made clear in the Quran that if God wanted everybody to believe in a certain way, he would create them like that.
Yeah.
So the idea here is that there's a certain level of human agency. You could say free will, although it's free will within some determinants. We have there's certain determinants in terms of our physical and social context, but also in a metaphysical sense as well.
Okay.
But by and large, we get to make our decisions.
Yes. Yeah.
Certainly, we get to make a decision whether we believe or disbelieve, obey or disobey God, fulfill the covenant or abandon it. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. The point here is not to make everybody believe a certain way or accept a certain religion. The point is that God is about truth and about justice and about integrity, and God is fulfilling his promise to humankind to provide guidance. Mm. What you do with it is part of your free will. It's part of your human agency. Yeah. It's up to you.
Yeah.
The prophets are just simply there so that God can say, I provided you with the message.
Yeah.
Right.
A mouthpiece for the message.
In fact, it goes back to what we call the primordial covenant, which predates human beings being on earth. God, it says in the Quran that God took from the loins of Adam all of, you could say, the souls of the human beings that would eventually, come to the earth. And they were asked the question. The question in Arabic in the Quran was, Alastu bi rabbikum, am I not your Lord? And the reply of humanity was, Bala shahidna, yes, we testify to this. So human beings testified to the lordship of God and our accountability to God, right? So this is the point. And so God promises Adam that guidance will continue. It puts Adam on earth, Adam and Eve, and guidance will continually be sent. Whether we believe it or not is completely up to us.
Yeah.
In fact, if you read the Quran, you can see there's so many places where the Quran is making reference to the people of Noah, the people of Abraham, the people of Saleh, the people of Hud, and so many other of the prophets whose people that they were sent to didn't accept their message. Muhammad, at various points in the Quran, you can see, is feeling distressed or down because there aren't a lot of people embracing this faith. It seems like he's failing in his mission, and God reassures him, this is not what it's about. It's not about everybody accepting this religion or accepting my message.
Yeah.
It's about me fulfilling my promise to say, I will give you the guidance.
Yeah.
What we do with it is up to us. And this has always been well understood by Muslims. So if you think about when the Muslims expanded out of the Arabian Peninsula, this is in the sort of after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, but still in the first half of the 7th century, they went into the lands of the Persians and the Byzantine. In fact, they defeated the Persian Empire and the Byzantine Empire. They didn't go and vanquish and kill all the people. They just simply took over the administration of these lands. They didn't force people to convert because it's not in the Muslim interest. It doesn't matter whether people follow this religion or not. In fact, Muslims are well understood that Christians have their covenant with God. Jews have their covenant with God. It's not for us to interfere in that. That's their business. And so when they went into these lands, it was often hundreds of years before local populations began to embrace the religion of Islam because Muslims put very little effort into it. It wasn't something that was necessary for Muslim rule in those lands. They just simply replaced the Byzantine or replaced the Persians as now the government in those lands. So this idea that the Muslims went out with the sword and the Quran in one hand and the sword in the other and saying, convert or die is nonsense. Where this convert part comes in is that where there was going to be armed confrontation between a Muslim army and another army, the Muslims felt an obligation to say, we don't want to shed blood because we're not supposed to do that, but we give you the opportunity. You can accept Islam, in which case we were not allowed to fight you, or you can enter into a peace treaty with us, in which case we've come to terms and there'll be no fighting. But if you refuse and we cannot reside this issue that we have, then it'll come to fighting. Right. This is where the conversion thing comes. Okay. It's not as though it's saying to people convert or die. Yeah. That was just a way out to avoid fighting. Another way out was to say, let's just make a peace treaty. Right, which is what the Prophet Muhammad did when he got to Medina after he and his companions they faced over a decade of persecution in Mecca, and then they migrated to Medina.
Who do you understand to be the parties responsible for that persecution at that time in Mecca?
Yeah. That was Muhammad's own tribe, the Quraysh tribe.
Okay.
So they were, in fact, he started receiving the revelations in 610. And because the revelations were saying there's only one God and there was a very strong social justice message, this offended the Quraysh tribe because they were polytheists. Right. He said, your idols are of no consequence. They can't help you. They can't harm you. And this was deeply offensive to the Quraysh.
Yes.
So in fact, like with many of the religions, the first to convert to Islam, a lot of them were the weaker members of society, the socially disadvantaged, freed slaves, women, etc. And so there was an intense persecution, so much so that some of the followers of Prophet Muhammad had to flee, and he sent them, interestingly, over the Red Sea into the Aksum kingdom, into Abyssinia or modern-day Ethiopia, which was under the rule of a Christian king. So you can see from the earliest time, the Prophet Muhammad understood the affinity between Islam and Christianity. In fact, when he received the first revelation of the Quran, he went to his wife, and his wife took him to her cousin, who was a Christian monk. So there has been a seamless relationship between Muslims and Christians right from the earliest times.
Yeah.
Right.
Which, by the way, seems like it will be possible if indeed the faith does not request any level of compulsion. Because one of the things that has permeated the understanding of most people that are outside of the faith is that compulsion is a significant part of the faith. Which is convert or die, which is,
Right.
and you've now articulated that.
Yeah. So some people may have done that. People in Africa or in Asia or other places may have experienced that.
Yeah.
But that is inconsistent with, we can't assume that people, just because they claim to belong to a religion, that they understand it flawlessly and they do everything in accordance with it. It never happens like that. We're talking about human beings here. Right?
Yeah, I mean,
come on.
We have the same problem in the Christian faith. I mean, do you know about the KKK?
Look, we're talking about human beings.
Yeah.
Human beings are flawed, right? So this right. So when he migrates from Mecca to Medina, the first thing he does is establish what's called the Constitution of Medina. Remember, Medina is a very pluralistic society. You've got Arab tribes and you've got Jewish tribes. You've got Muslims and you've got non-Muslims. And what he does is he establishes the terms and conditions to regulate the relations between, the rights and responsibilities between the various tribes. Okay. He declares them to be one ummah, one community, and makes it very clear that everybody has to work together for the defense of this city, because he knows the Quraysh are not going to let up on this, and they're going to pursue him. And this culminates in them laying siege to Medina with an army of about 10,000. And when they are unsuccessful in that siege, that's when the Quraysh realize, well, they can't defeat the Muslims militarily, and that's when they sign the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, which is a peace treaty between the two, and sort of neutralizes the Quraysh from that point. But what the Prophet Muhammad does, in addition to having this Constitution of Medina to organize relations between its various people, and remember, there's no clause in the Constitution of Medina that says anybody has to convert to Islam. They're accepted in what they believe, whether they're Jewish or even if they're polytheistic. They're accepted for that. And this becomes, or you could say, the template for how he organizes relations with other communities outside of Medina, particularly other Jewish communities and Christian communities. And so, what I talk about in the book, and, it's building on from what my co-author Ibrahim Zain talked about in a previous book that he wrote with Ahmad al-Wakil specifically on the covenants of the Prophet Muhammad. So in addition to the Constitution of Medina and the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, there are these other covenants of the Prophet with the monks of Mount Sinai, for example, with the Christians of Najran, with the Jews of Khaybar and Makna. And there's about maybe a dozen of these documents that have, over the past decade or so, been quite thoroughly examined by scholars, historians, linguists, and people in the field of Islamic studies.
And those documents effectively existed, I guess, from what I'm hearing you say, as proof that there wasn't the idea of compulsion that we see that's rifing through and representing largely what the Muslim faith is about, which is that compulsion of every person who doesn't believe. Those documents exist as proof that that's never what it was really about. It was about we want to be able to live in peace with you. We have this belief system, and we want to be able to be accepted and live here with you. So either become a part of it, if I'm understanding you correctly, become a part of it, and then we have an obligation to not fight you. In the same token, we can have a treaty, which will also, we can't break that as a covenant, because the faith really has a deep understanding about what a covenant is, which we do as well in the covenant with that we have with God through Christ. And then and then the third option was, well, if you didn't want any of these, then well, I guess we're at war. So, okay, that be the case, why then is there becomes such a permeation of the understanding, or so many people that consistently act out of this ideology of that compulsion ideology, right? Why then is there such, and again, Muhammad is attributed for that compulsion ideology, even though from the historical facts that you're giving me, he really wasn't. So what has morphed over time? What has changed that has led not just the belief, but there's an actual reality that people do act out of that consistently to the point where, well, it's easy to point that if they're Muslim, they're going to try and compel you to be a part of them at some point, or you are not. Well, now, as I understand, you'll be acting against the requirements of the book and the covenants within it, which is you should not be killing or harming any other person. Right. Yeah. So why then has that become such a, I mean, you can easily see on, you can go do a quick Google and you can see on YouTube somebody in a plane somewhere saying, Allah Akbar as they quickly say that they are more than happy to bomb the plane or commit some kind of atrocious act in the name of Allah. And that's become what we see more and more. Yeah. Why then? What has happened? Yeah. What changed? What happened that has led to that widespread?
I think we've established that there's a myriad of motivations of why humans do terrible things. To give some nobility, perhaps, or legitimacy to some of these terrible things they do, human beings sometimes invoke religion.
Yes.
Right. So we know this happens.
Yes.
But just to clarify a point about the Prophet's covenants with Christians and others, these were not, there was not a fighting or anything that went on in order for this to happen. The Prophet just simply went out to them and said, I'm affording you protection, protecting your communities, your life, your property, your places of worship. He's asking nothing in return for that. He's just simply saying that your lives are given to you by God and they deserve to be protected. And our religion says that everybody's lives need to be protected. It's a fulfillment of that obligation for human security and peaceful coexistence. If you look at the clauses of these covenants, and by the way, you know, they're made with communities that are very geographically dispersed and of different, you know, religions and religious denominations, but they're all saying very similar things, which kind of gives us confidence as to their historicity and their authenticity. But what that they're saying is that the Muslims won't interfere in the ecclesiastical affairs of the Christians. That's your business. We will just simply ensure that your people and your places and your wealth are protected. It even goes so far as to say, if any woman if any woman marries a Muslim man, she doesn't have to convert, and she is still entitled to religious instruction from your religious authorities. So we're not encroaching on your religion whatsoever. We just want to ensure that there is peaceful coexistence between us. That's it. It's even in terms of like taxation, monks, bishops and so forth were not taxed. Women, children were not taxed. Right. The only people that were ever taxed were men who had the capacity to pay. And in fact, you've probably heard this term jizya used, which is the name of that particular tax. It exempted people from engaging in military service. So it's not like some of those empires that went around taking all the young men from, you know, the thing and putting them in their army. And, you know, the Muslims were not like that. They didn't engage in this kind of thing. You were exempt from military service. You paid the men who could afford paid a basic amount, which was far less than the amount of tax you and I paid to, right? 50%. Right. Nothing like that. You know, a very, you could say, nominal amount. Not oppressive. It's forbidden in Islam to oppress. It's forbidden to exploit. Now, again, that's not to say that some human beings haven't done that, but we're here having a conversation about what is this religion, and we have to make a distinction between the religion and what some people might do. Right. And some of those people that are doing these things are masquerading as representatives of that faith. And the media and political discourses are facilitating that. This is highly problematic. It should be the prerogative of Muslims to say what is our religion and who is part of it and who is not part of it. And this ISIS and these groups, they're not part of our faith. And that has been, explicitly stated by the ANIC, the Australian National Imams Council, among many others. I mean, we can go back even to 2014. There was an open letter written by world-renowned Muslim scholars and leaders that denounced ISIS. In fact, they went through every aspect of their claim to establish a caliphate and every aspect of various policies. I mean, I think there were like 20 or 30 different clauses in the document refuting, all of these various claims of the group.
Yeah.
So, and the thing is that if people say, Muslims, they're not condemning terrorism. That is not true. I mean, I wrote a book back in 2014 quoting from someone who had written earlier than me saying, here are these websites where Muslim leaders, scholars and so forth have absolutely and unequivocally condemned terrorism as being something that is completely forbidden in our religion. We saw at the beginning of the genocide in Gaza, the Prime Minister of Israel come out, quote from the Bible, and state that made reference to the Palestinians as the Amalekites.
Yes.
Kill every man and woman, child and infant, and what was it? Ox and whatever. You know the verse better than I do.
Yeah.
I mean, what kind of this is not any of the religions of God. I don't know where this comes from. But take the Quran, for example, in relation to this. What does the Quran say about when Moses took the children of Israel from the clutches of the Pharaoh, took them to the what's called in the Quran the Arada Muqaddisa, to the Holy Land, yeah?
Yeah.
They were not told to go in and, commit genocide or, just to kill and destroy all the people inside. No, they were told, go enter the city, sujadan wa hittatun. Sujadan is a word that means, sujud is to prostrate. So it means with humility. Okay. Go in humbly. And hittatun is a word that means in repentance. So it's not, and then the very next line of this, you can find this in a couple of places in the Quran. Look up, for example, 2:58 and 59 and 7:161 and 162. Both make the same reference saying, but they changed the words of God to something other than what God said. So it can't be in the Quran where the covenant of God is don't drive people from their homes and kill people. And then there's a story about going into the Holy Land and killing everybody and expelling them. And it can't be. This can't be a book of God if it has this type of inconsistency. God is saying that they changed the words of what God said. God didn't tell them to commit a genocide. They put that into their book.
When you say they put that into their book, you're referring to the biblical story around, I suppose it will be, but I think by that time it was then Joshua's time. So Moses didn't make it to the promised land, which I guess is what we refer to as the Holy Land.
Because they refused to enter under those terms, and so they were wandering the desert for 40 years, right?
Yeah, we now know that from where they started to where the land was, it should have taken less than a day to get there, but it took them 40 years to get there. And so up until Moses died, and Moses wasn't able to enter into the land himself because of his anger problem, which is what the Bible teaches. Then you have Joshua, who inherited that group as the new leader, who then walked around the walls of Jerusalem, and then they went in there and had the conquering kind of story that we're told of. So I think what you're stating there is that as far as what that narrative is, was a change of what the word of God was, and this, I suppose, is coming from Prophet Muhammad and his interactions with that angel. They go back and touch on that story because Muhammad wouldn't have been around at that time. So he only knows that information or that story because he's been given that. And so he's been told at that point that, hey, this is not what actually happened, or this is not what should have happened. Can I clarify that that's what you're referring to?
And also, if we look at what historians have said about this, historians who have studied the land of Palestine, and you can refer to it by other names, as, it was previously to that, the kingdom of David and Solomon, and then the kingdom of Judah and Israel was there. So this is the Holy Land we're talking about.
Yeah.
This has never been a land that has been consistently ruled by, a single entity. For over 1,000 years or so, it was ruled by the Egyptians. It was ruled by the Muslims for 1,200 years. I mean, I think the Muslims have ruled that land longer than anybody else. And I want to come back to a point about this relating to the Jewish people as well. But you've had the Persians, the Romans, the Byzantine, the Hittites, the Hyksos, others of all, Babylonians have ruled this land. But the key point here is that there has never been a single people that have inhabited that land that we could refer to as the children of Israel. Okay. And another real important point about the children of Israel is that they have adopted different religions over time. So they've adopted what after the Babylonian exile became Judaism. They've adopted Christianity when it came to that land. They've adopted Islam when it came to that land as well. Those Palestinians that are there today are what are the DNA-wise the children of Israel. It's just that they've adopted Christianity or they've adopted Islam later on. They have as legitimate claim to that land. As anyone who has remained Jewish, because this is the land of Abraham, right? This is, this is the land where people who believe in the one God, are entitled to reside. So the point about Jewish people is that they have never been prevented from living in that land by Muslims. The first time the Muslims came to rule in Jerusalem was during the time of Umar bin al-Khattab. He was the second, what's called the Caliph, but at the time the title was called Amir al-Mu'mineen, the commander of the believers. So it's in his time that the Muslims defeated the Byzantine, who were the rulers there at the time. Keeping in mind, just a few years before that, the Persians had been ruling for a little while as well, right? And it's because of the Persians going in and doing the kinds of destruction that they did, with assistance from various Jewish tribes, that Jews were banished from living there. So when the Muslims got there, there were no Jews in Jerusalem. They weren't allowed to live there under Byzantine policy. And in fact, the first, you could say, treaty that the Umar made accepted the rules as they were. But when he made the covenant with the people of Jerusalem, he allowed for the return of the Jewish people to come and reside in Jerusalem again, which they were prevented from doing under the Byzantine. Similarly, go back, then sometime later, the Crusaders come in, right? Okay. And they kill everybody in the city. I mean, it's even written that, if you want to know what we did with the inhabitants of Jerusalem, know that we rode up to the knee, in their blood, up to the knees of our horses. So they killed Orthodox Christians, they killed Jews, they killed Muslims, right? When Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, Saladin, retook Jerusalem in 1187, what was his covenant with the people of Jerusalem? It was to allow everybody to live there peacefully, and including the Jewish people to be able to return back and live there because they had been excluded from being lived. Right. So there is not a history of Muslim anti-Semitism. Anywhere in the Muslim world, Jewish people and Christian people were able to live in peace and security because of what we spoke about earlier, these covenants of the Prophet Muhammad, which said that it doesn't matter if you accept the specific message of the Prophet Muhammad, if you continue to follow Judaism, you continue to follow Christianity, fine. You have your covenant with God. We can all reside here in this land peacefully because we agree that everybody is entitled to be safe from the hands of everybody else. To the extent that you agree to that, there's no issue with us coexisting.
So the question around that then is why, by and large, I feel as though there hasn't been, from my perspective, and I could be wrong, there hasn't been as much attempt at defending that what is held as truth by the Muslims that understand the foundations of their belief. From my perspective, it doesn't look like there's been a lot of attempt at defending that, and there's been almost a subdued way of relating to well, let's call it the West and everybody else who might have a particular perspective of what the Islamic belief system is. There hasn't been as much an attempt to defend that. Actually, no, that's not what it is. Like, you don't, or maybe it is purposefully designed by the political class and the media so that defense isn't brought to light. Because if what you're saying is indeed true, then the version of people that are radicalized and do what they do, they're a minority, And the majority isn't standing out to say, actually, we are the majority and we act nothing like those people. And I don't
think so.
Not from my perspective. And I feel quite genuinely, until we had a conversation, our first conversation.
I think that this is a matter of your point of view.
Yes.
Like, how much effort have you made to look into what it is that Muslims actually say?
Yeah.
I mean, almost for the past 25 years, almost the entire field of Islamic studies has been dedicated to, I wouldn't say the entire field, but much of it has been to address these claims of violent extremism and enmity towards non-Muslims and all of that. I mean, you can go back to 1999, a very important book written by a non-Muslim scholar in the field of Islamic studies, John Esposito. His book was called The Islamic Threat, Myth or Reality. At that point, it is even before 9/11, he's addressing these claims that there is some kind of a, green menace to replace, the red menace. Muslims have consistently rejected groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They've consistently rejected terrorism and these kinds of violence against civilians.
Yeah.
But we also have to keep in mind that there are groups of Muslims who are under unlawful occupation that do have a right to resist that occupation under divine law and under international law.
Which takes me to the question around, I guess, the pro-Palestine and versus the, I guess, what the people call the recent movement of anti-Semitic ideologies, which is effectively not being for the Jews or being anti-Jews, and that we know about the historical events of 7th of October in 2023 that led to then what we have seen over the last 2 years. And so in the West, it all of that complexity, all of that nuance is just being boiled down to, are you pro-Palestine or are you pro-Jews? And it's one of those two things. So, okay, based on the historical context that you have, your knowledge of that land and the people that have lived there and the role that Muhammad played there, the peace treaties that should exist in spaces like that, what is currently happening there? And I think there's a lot of misconception of the realities of what is happening there.
You loaded up with so many points in that question. Let me try and break it down.
Sure.
First of all,
please.
Let's be very careful about using the term Jew inappropriately or inaccurately.
Yeah.
If we're talking about the religion of Judaism, we can talk about Jew. If we're talking about an ethnic group, we can use the word Jew. But if we're talking about a lot of this relating to the unlawful occupation of Palestine, we're really talking about the state of Israel, and we may also be talking about the ideology of Zionism. And we have to make distinctions here, because if you go to any of the Palestine protests, these are protests to say, stop genocide, stop killing people. And at every one of these, there's Jewish people. I mean, one of the issues that I think is most unfortunate is that Jewish people have been marginalized in this context. You've got the Jewish Council of Australia and so many other Jewish groups and organizations that are opposed to the genocide. They're opposed to the apartheid in the West Bank. They're opposed to Israel's unlawful occupation. But it seems to be that what the media and certain politicians have done is recognized only part of the Jewish community, particularly the Zionist organizations, as being the only representatives of the Jewish community. And that's as problematic as saying, Al-Qaeda is the only representative of, the Muslim community. We're deeply offended by that.
Yeah.
Similarly, Jewish people are deeply offended that you would say, you would equate it with the state of Israel that is committing genocide, according to the United Nations, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Bet Salam, an Israeli human rights organization, the International Association of Genocide Scholars, all have declared this to be a genocide. Who wants to be associated with that? Certainly not large sectors of the Jewish community.
Yeah.
And their voice should be heard and respected and acknowledged. So there's that point. If you go to any of the pro-Palestine rallies, which are essentially calls for the ending of the genocide, there are lots of Jewish people there. I've been involved with advocacy for Palestinian rights for decades. Many of the Jewish people that I know, I met through that movement. Yeah. Most of the time you'll find Jewish speakers at these events. So the idea that these are anti-Semitic or against Jewish people is just simply wrong and ridiculous. So I think a lot of people that make these claims haven't been there and they don't know.
Yeah.
There's no anti-Semitism at these. There's no statements about Jewish people. The focus is specifically on the policies and practices of the State of Israel, the unlawful policies and practices.
Yeah.
If we look, let's be honest and clear about what's happened in Palestine, particularly let's just look at Gaza for a moment.
Yeah.
I mean, Gaza has been under siege since 2007. It's unlawfully occupied according to international law. The people who live there have a right to be liberated. The Palestinians have a right to be liberated. The overwhelming majority of nations around the world, member states of the United Nations, recognize the state of Palestine. Israel is violating international law by maintaining what is an unlawful and this is the International Court of Justice said just in July last year, Israel's occupation of the Palestinian lands is unlawful. So let's be very clear about that. They have a right to be liberated from that unlawful occupation. Okay. Now, that is not to say that any group or individual can kill innocent people.
Yeah.
But let's be very clear here. What Israel has done involves the displacement of 2 million people, the destruction of almost all of their homes, so they have no shelter. Think about what a home means from our own religious perspective. It's your space, it's your shelter, it's your comfort. Destroyed all of that, and then bombed them again when they were sheltering in tents. It destroyed all of their hospitals, so they could not recover from their wounds and illnesses that they've been suffering through the heat, through the cold, over 2 years. It destroyed all of their schools, almost, all of their universities, all of their churches, and most of their mosques. Who does this? Tell me, dig deep into your understanding of your faith. And is this something that God allows for? Do you think this is godly practice? Absolutely not. This is satanic practice. To destroy people's homes, to destroy hospitals, to destroy schools, to destroy universities, to destroy places of worship is absolutely and utterly ungodly. It's a violation of God's law and it's a violation of international law. So and people know that. So when we ask the question about anti-Semitism, people have wrongly directed hate towards Jewish people. Jewish people are not to blame for this, and there's so many Jewish people that are standing opposed to this kind of atrocities. The state of Israel is driving people towards hatred of Jewish people in the way ISIS drives people towards hatred of Muslims. We have to be very clear and unambiguous that our religions do not permit the killing and the oppression of people. Whether it's Judaism or Christianity or Islam or Hinduism or any other, we do not stand for the killings of people because human life is sacred. Human beings have rights. The state of Israel already has 78% of the land of Palestine, and you want another 2%?
Where the people reside finally.
Let those people reside in peace, for God's sake. Another point, the state of Israel was declared over 78% of Palestine when those, the people that formed that state, those entities, only legally owned 6.6% of the land that they had purchased in those years during the British occupation.
So this is in 1948 when it was declared.
Right. So you only legally own 6.6% of the land. You declared your state over 78% after you committed mass ethnic cleansing. We're talking about 750,000 to 800,000 Palestinians driven from their homes in 1947, 1948, 1949. We're talking about at least 35 documented massacres. We're talking about at least 11 towns completely emptied of their Palestinian inhabitants. This is not how you form a godly state by doing these kinds of things. So absolutely not. And, may I say that this is not information that, is obscure or hard to find. You can read the work of Israeli historians and read this. I mean, I recommend to all your listeners or viewers, read a book by Ilan Pappé. Ilan Pappé is an Israeli historian. The book is called The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. If you want to know the history of where this issue started, read that book.
Yeah.
Read another book by an Israeli historian by the name of Avi Shleim. The book is called The Iron Wall. If you don't want to read Jewish sources, read an English source. David Hurst, The Gun and the Olive Branch.
Yeah.
Like there's, people who are making this commentary often haven't read a book about this. This is the problem. It's coming from a place of ignorance.
Yeah. It's become this really clear cut. And I said it at the start when I asked you the question, which is if you're pro-Palestine, then you're basically anti-Jews. That's the framing, right? That's become largely known.
Yeah, ridiculous and wrong.
Right. And then if you say, well, pro-Israel, then some people are like, well, or pro-Jews, then it's like, well, are you for the massive ethnic cleansing of an entire people group? Which is exactly where the truth really lies. And so, and you said something to me before earlier, which was it is very important that we are specific about the language that we use to describe whether it's a group of people or it's a specific nuance of I guess, bad actors that have chosen to go down a specific path for whatever reason that those might be. And the reality is that, and I said in one of my videos that I recorded earlier in the week, which I said that what is happening or what has been happening in Palestine for the last however many years, that 2 years that's been going on for, and even more when you look at some of the history further back, is no different in moral terms to what we saw occurred right here on Australian soil. And so what the idea of being pro-Palestine is, I mean, I see our Prime Minister is in Australia is being almost being chastised about he's coming out of and being pro-Palestine. And don't get me wrong, while the guy does a lot of, like many of the other politicians who seem to be bought and paid for in the way that they act, which is not putting the responsibility of the people you care for first. You don't put their good at heart first. You put in other agendas, it seems. And while he's done a lot of wrong things in his time, the idea that him coming out and saying, I am pro-Palestine, which is effectively, I employ the end of genocide to a people group who have done nothing to deserve it. And so the framing that our world, that the West now has for that is, oh, hang on a second, he's anti-Semitic. How dare he be anti-Semitic? He wants the end of, he cannot come out and just simply say that. For example, they've said he can't come out and simply say that the mass shooting of Jews at Bondi Beach is unequivocally wrong by whoever the group might be, whatever faith they might hold on to when they do that in their act of terror. That's wrong. They say you can't come out and do that because it's anti-Semitic, and it's like, well, this is where things get convoluted and get mixed. Truth gets embedded with some false doctrines and false ideologies. And the reality is, as I have now seen, is that I think you mentioned something before about actions and acts that are just deeply satanic. And that even came out in the conversation that we had. And it beats me over the last few days. And I've started to recognize that, the Bible talks about what the enemy is really good at is deception. A lot of lies that he then, and to really do lies effectively, to really do deception effectively, you've got to mix in some truth with some lies. Now, I don't know where this stands in the Quran as far as, the story about Jesus being in the mountains, where the 40 days and 40 nights, where he fasted in the wilderness, and he's being tempted by the devil, and the devil uses scripture, and then he mixes up that a little bit with some, so in that case, you should bow down to me so I can give you this, or you can jump off the mount, you can jump off these mountains, and the God will send his angels to bear you and you will not hurt yourself. He always does that. And so when I look at what is happening, the mixture of you have a prime minister who is deeply woke in a lot of ways, in a lot of things that he does. And you and I can agree that what the woke ideology is fundamentally against what we believe as people that are faith-filled. But he stands for Palestine. Right, he's pro-Palestine, and that's some lies mixed in with some truth. And I started having this realization that what the enemy has become very good at is continuing this deception that ultimately leads to humans being pitted against each other.
Okay, there's a lot in that.
Right.
All right, let me just start with this. There's a lot of political opportunism going on. So
Yes.
a lot of what we're hearing on the media is just people trying to exploit the situation for their own specific interests, political or otherwise, right? Okay, so let's just set that aside. That he's pro-Palestinian, I'm not really sure. The issue is not about being pro-Palestinian or pro-something. The issue for us as people of faith is about being pro-humanity, about being pro the rights of human beings to be safe, secure, to have welfare and well-being. Like our religions teach us to be charitable, to restrain our whims and desires according, to be self-disciplined. I mean, it's not about the state of Palestine per se, but it's about human beings should not be bombed and starved and have their homes destroyed and, have their places of worship destroyed so that you can have another 2% of their homeland. This is not our religions. It is not godly.
And if you bring you bring that home, humans should not be getting shot at.
And you mentioned something else about Satan. I think that this is important to talk about. In the Quran, there's some very important references to when God made Adam. And it says there that when God made Adam, he declared that he was creating a Khalifa for the earth. So Adam wasn't yet put on the earth, but this was clearly the plan. And the angels said, are you going to create a being that's going to shed blood? And God said, I know what you don't know. So they were already onto it, that this is the capacity of human beings to be this kind of creature, to be this kind of being. Anyway, so God creates Adam, and in the assembly of angels is another being called Iblis. Iblis is one of what is referred to as the jinn, right? So it's a being like human beings with consciousness that is accountable to God, but as we are made from clay, the jinn are made from, you could say, fire, is what the Quran, nar, is what the Quran refers to it as. Okay, so as we are, everything is matter and energy, right? And we are, we have energy, but we manifest as matter. They're kind of the opposite. They have a certain matter, but they manifest as energy. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So that might be a scientific way of thinking about it. All right.
So
the assembly of angels is commanded, prostrate to Adam. They prostrate, but he refuses. Iblis refuses. So God inquires, why did you refuse to prostrate? And his reply in the Arabic is, Ana khayrum minhum. I'm better than him. Khalaqtani min nar wa khalaqtahu min tin. You made me from fire and you made him from clay. Let's analyze that for a moment. Before we do that, let's recall we talked about the primordial covenant, everybody acknowledging the lordship of God and our accountability to God. The very next covenant that we read about in the Quran is the covenant between God and Adam. And the covenant between God and Adam, and then there's subsequently with humanity, is about the enmity of Satan. Satan is your avowed enemy. Do not follow the footsteps of Satan. So if God's going to give us this covenant, this instruction, God is also going to equip us with an understanding of that enemy. Right? Because the wise Lord does that. So here we get dialogue directly from Satan. Ana khayrum minhu. I'm better than him. Now he could have said, well, I've been created for X amount of time and I've consistently worshipped you, and this is a new thing, we don't untested, we don't know whether you always tell us we only worship you, why would I bow to him? He could have said that, but he didn't. His response gives us an insight into his mindset. He immediately jumps to physical characteristics. I'm made from fire and he's made from clay. And I'm better because of these physical characteristics. This is what we in human terms refer to as supremacism or racism. And we know that the Satan's objective is to make human beings suffer. So that we don't follow the will of God. and we follow him and we suffer like he's going to suffer, right, in hell.
Yeah.
Drag us down with him, in other words. So if you think about all the human suffering throughout history, think about the Atlantic slave trade, colonialism, genocides, wars, conflict. What's the root of all of this? It's suffering. One set of human beings making another set of human beings suffer on the basis of what? What does it come down to?
I am better.
I'm white, you're black.
Yeah.
I'm this tribe, you're that tribe.
Yeah.
We're this nation, you're that nation.
Yeah.
Right. This is precisely what's going on today. The Palestinians can't live on their land because they're Palestinian and not Israeli.
Yeah.
This is the issue. This is precisely the problem. This is supremacism.
Yeah.
Think about all of the racism and these atrocities that we see around the world. This is what it comes down to.
Yeah.
This is satanic.
Yeah.
And we must resist it as human beings.
Yeah. I think that's quite powerful because, like I was saying, it very much is as I started observing recently, it's the epitome of all things, right? That satanic movement, the ideology that it wants to make people suffer, therefore it will do that through deception of one man or another man, and by weaving in lies with some truth, and it amplifies that in various forms, which is why much of the world is convinced that Islam is not a religion of peace. It's a religion of war and suffering and belittling. And I mean, but if you actually look back in history, you see where a lot of atrocities were also committed in the name of the cross.
Yeah.
But the epitome of that too was exactly the same. We hold something that is better than you, therefore you have no right to life.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think we belabored that.
May I say, I think we're at a pivotal point in our human history, and we've been at pivotal points, many times in the past. But we see the corpus of international law on its knees. We see the rules-based international order shredded.
Yeah.
Global justice is, it seems far from being effective at the moment. We see mass atrocities with no accountability. I mean, the worst atrocities you could think of, destroying people's homes.
Yeah.
50,000 children become orphans. Thousands of children no limbs. Who does this? What kind of religious state does this? Right?
Yeah.
They're making a mockery of religion here.
Yeah.
I mean,
hiding under the banner of it, by the way.
Whichever. I mean, what I'm trying to do, what Professor Ibrahim Zain and I are trying to do with this book, Covenants of Allah, Keystone of Islam, is to speak to an educated audience. Yeah. And this is not just Muslims, this is non-Muslims as well. An audience that is concerned about the state of the world. An audience that knows something about Islam or has an interest in it, for better or worse. An audience that is concerned about religion. It's concerned about, rules-based order, the rule of law, justice.
Yeah.
It's concerned about the coexistence of people. It's concerned about humanity. And so much of what we have experienced and much of what we have been addressing over the course of the 21st century has got something to do with Islam. If we think about, the securitization of states and various sectors within society, if we think about, the anti-terrorism laws, if we think about just our public consciousness, our public debates, what we see in the media, our political discourses, so much of it seems to come back to this podcast, right? It comes back to the question of Islam.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do in this book is say, this is what Islam is about.
Yeah.
And we're going to take it right from the basics, right from that primordial covenant.
Yeah.
Alastu bi rabbikum. Let's go from there. When I say, keystone of Islam, what does that mean? Many people would be familiar with another architectural metaphor, which is the 5 pillars of Islam. You've probably heard of that.
Yeah.
The belief that there's only one God and Muhammad is a prophet of God.
Yeah.
Although Muslims acknowledge, all of the prophets.
Yeah.
Daily prayers, charity, fasting in the month of Ramadan, and pilgrimage to Mecca if you're able to do it. These are the 5 pillars. But to extend that architectural metaphor, we're referring to the covenants as the keystone of Islam. What's a keystone? At the top of an arch, that stone that locks all of the other parts of the arch into place, that gives it its structure and its integrity, that's the keystone. And the covenants do that in relation to Islam. Islam is comprised of various elements of the idea of God consciousness, which was what we call in Arabic taqwa.
Yeah.
The idea that there is one God who created us and everything that we can see and we can't see.
Yeah.
This is tawheed. The idea of justice, adl, we must be just to one another. The idea of khalifa, all of us as human beings are on this earth and we have a responsibility to each other and the earth. The amana, God put us here and this is a trust. We have to fulfill that trust.
Yeah.
So all of these concepts, we argue, form the fundamental concepts of the Quran. They intersect with each other, but at the apex of this, the keystone of this, is the concept of covenant, in Arabic, ahad and mithaq. Okay. And that's what this is about. I think anyone who reads this book will have a comprehensive understanding of the religion of Islam as it has engaged historically with other peoples, Christians and Jewish people included. We also have a chapter in there on the situation in Palestine as well.
Yeah.
So I think what we need, though, is that we have a lot of people engaging in discourse who are ignorant, who are not well read, and who are not well educated. So we need to raise up our level of literacy. Literacy about the world, literacy about religion, literacy about other peoples. So
I think for me, this is, I feel strongly that this is one of perhaps 3 levels of conversation, because one of the part of the conversations that I wanted to go into today, and I think we might have to leave it for another time, is around now that we understand that the basic premise of what the faith is, and we can agree from historical context, from actuality of what the book says, that the Muslim faith is largely founded on the Quran. It doesn't say what a lot of people believe that it says. It doesn't give out the rules that a lot of people believe that it does. But the next thing I was really going to then build this on is kind of an idea of giving an account for specific things that has led to so much misconception of what the Muslim faith is. And then the other thing that is adjacent to that is perhaps, it sounds to me, for example, we interpret righteousness actually quite similarly as we determined the other day in our conversation. And that might be worth explaining at some point. But as we draw to a close, I think I want to land on a particular thing. Adjacent to that, as I was saying, is that it would be really interesting to work through together in a journey where we give an account for our faith, in the sense of, I know what it means to be a Christian, you know what it means to be a Muslim, and I feel as though there is an intersection between that side and the other side, and not in an effort to push for any particular kind of conversion, but to really go deeper in understanding why then Islam, or why then Christianity. And there are things that are said within the Bible that gives some context that I think will be worth me understanding, even from an education perspective, as to how it's viewed and why it says that. And I think so we'll go back to the former thing that I talked about, which is one of the many things that have perhaps over time been misinterpreted, and the Islamic faith has been judged based on one of those very, very isolated, I suppose, factors. For example, and it's one that's kind of permeating the UK at the moment. So the particular one I think I wanted to touch on and go into was there is this historical narrative around the Prophet Muhammad, who engaged or married a young girl, and it was said that she was married at the age of 6, and effectively, and like you said before, acknowledging that a lot of humanity will do bad things in the name of religion, and we can identify both historic times that has happened and modern day times that it is happening. And I think so that particular narrative has seemed to give just or cause for some modern day bad actors to engage in things like pedophilia or some very, very deep, dark behaviors that then they attribute to, well, that's what we are taught to do, and that's what our religion teaches. And from what I can understand, if it is what it is, and if there was an angelic encounter that led Muhammad to writing down what he did, I don't believe that most of those things that have been said will be true. So let's talk a little bit about that historical context around Prophet Muhammad and his marriage of the I guess they say 6-year-old girl Aisha. I think
she wasn't 6. Let me get into it. All right, look. Here's the first thing. Let's look at this from a sociological perspective in relation to what you said at the beginning of what well, let's call it a question, but it was pretty long.
Yeah.
And that is that people know those that are part of their in-group that they associate with, right? They know less about the out-group, and they tend to think of them homogeneously. They look at them all the same, and they don't make differentiations.
Yes, correct.
Right? Okay. So we live in you could say Western society that you could say ostensibly Christian, but I don't think that's really accurate either. But certainly Muslims are a minority.
Yes.
So Muslims are looked at homogeneously. There's lack of differentiation. Okay. But when we look at others, we are able to make those differentiations of the majority. We don't look at Christians and think, or we don't look at the Ku Klux Klan and think, oh, that's Christianity. We know that is a violation of what Christianity stands for.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think others who look at Muslims are not able to make those same differentiations. Partially it's because of prejudice. Partially it's because of ignorance, or it's used to serve some kind of, a gripe or agenda or grind an axe or whatever it might be. So let's talk about that as well. People need to reach out from their in-group and understand that while there is diversity within their group, there's also diversity in every other group as well. It's ignorant to think that everybody is the same. And this is one of the very important things the Quran does. When it makes reference to Christians or polytheists or, the hypocrites or some other group, it doesn't make blanket statements about them. It actually is very nuanced about the differences of opinions and views and conduct within those groups. Yeah. So let's use that model as a way of understanding the other, not looking at any group homogeneously, but understanding that there's diversity because as humans, we're diverse.
Yes.
Okay. Now, coming to this point, this is a claim that's made, I think, as part of a campaign just simply to discredit Islam and discredit the Prophet Muhammad. I disagree with you that there's a problem with pedophilia among Muslims. I'm not saying there aren't Muslims who are pedophiles. It's across all human beings, and but it's not like we don't find that in our mosques the same way it's been found in churches, for example, and it's been, across particularly the Western world, including here in Australia, inquiries into this. It's widespread. It's a massive problem.
Absolutely.
We don't have that same problem. Yeah. Okay, but so this idea that Muhammad married Aisha and she was 6, and that is encouraged. I disagree with you. I don't think that this is the case, and I disagree that she was 6. And I say that on the basis of extensive amount of evidence. Let's begin with let's take the first point. What is the evidence presented that she was 6? It's not from the Quran. It's not from a statement of the Prophet. It appears in a narration that is attributed to Aisha. And it comes from a narration that's attributed specifically to her nephew's son, right? Okay, so her nephew is someone by the name of Urwa. His son is Harith bin Urwa. Okay, and it's from Harith that we get this narration. He used to live in Medina and then he moved to Iraq. It's in Iraq where this narration is collected from him. A lot of the narrations are not collected from Medina where the Prophet lived. They're collected from far afield, which is another problem. Some of these collectors of these things were not even Arabs. They were from Uzbekistan or somewhere else, which is another problem. But anyway, so it's said that when he was living in Medina, he was of sound mind. But in Iraq, we don't trust what he says and we don't quote or narrate anything from him because we think that he was no longer of sound mind. It's this guy who's narrated this thing. Now, there's 2 issues here. One is that he may have said that she was 6, but we have to understand in Arab custom that, and I think that you mentioned that this is also in Jewish tradition as well.
Yes.
That the age of a girl is counted from when she is mature, gets her
first menstrual cycle.
Right. Okay, so if she, let's say she goes as 10 or 12, then we're talking about 16 or 18.
Yes.
Okay. So it could be that.
Add that additional time.
It could be that.
Yeah.
But the other evidence that we've got from the Hadith as well, and from other kinds of calculations of dates and times of things, suggests that she was probably 18 or 19. And all of those other sources corroborate that view. Now, let's keep in mind, Arabs didn't celebrate their birthdays, and a lot of the time we don't know when people were born and how old they were accurately, right?
Verify that.
First of all, we don't know that.
Yeah.
In some cases we know, but in most cases we don't. In Aisha's case, we don't. This is what we do know, though. There's a book by a person by the name of Ibn Ishaq. It's considered to be the first biography of the Prophet Muhammad. It was written about 100 years, about a century after the Prophet Muhammad. Okay. But in that book, he talks about who were the first people to embrace the religion of Islam when the Prophet Muhammad started to convey the religion. And it was mentioned that Abu Bakr was one of the first. This is the father of Aisha. And it's mentioned there that Asma and Aisha, Asma is the older sister. She's about 10 years older than Aisha. They were among those first who embraced Islam. Now, Aisha at least has to be born, but more realistically, she at least has to be competent of mind. She can't be a toddler.
Yeah.
She's got to be able to speak at least. Yeah. But I would say more accurately, she's got to at least be able to have a mental capacity and a memory to be able to say she's embracing this faith. Yeah. So that and we have to remember that the first revelation is in the year 610, and the migration is when it's said that the Prophet married Aisha. That was in the year 622. Okay, so that's 12 years later, right? So if she was a child, she's then 12 plus. If she was 6 years old at the time, then she's 18. Okay, so first evidence, Ibn Ishaq's biography of the Prophet records Aisha as being one of the early converts to Islam. So she at least has to be born. Most likely she could be a child. She could be a little bit older than that, but she's got to be at least mentally competent. We do those calculations. It puts her age around 18 by the time of the migration from Mecca to Medina, which is when the Prophet is said to have married her. Yeah. Okay, so she's 18. The next thing is we've got narrations from Aisha that say that she recalls when the first Muslims had to migrate from Mecca to Abyssinia to be where they got protection under the Christian king there. Yeah. So she's got to be alive then, and she's got to, she may have been a child, but she's got to be at least mentally competent to have that memory, right?
As well.
So again, do the calculation. It puts her at about 18. Maybe she's 6. 12 years later, she's 8. She's 18. Another example would be the revelation of a chapter in the Quran called Surah Al-Qamar, or the moon. She recalls the occasion when that revelation came down. Again, she's got a memory of it. She's got to be at least, a child of, 6, 7, 8, something like that to be able to remember such a thing.
Yeah.
Okay, again. But another very important one is that her sister was remarkable because she lived for a very long time. She's said to have lived to 100, which was unusual, I suppose, from those times. Many people, the Prophet included, only lived to 60-something, and others around him only lived, about that time, some, less.
Yeah.
And so we know that Asma was 10 years older than Aisha.
Yeah. And
from this narration, it said that Asma was 28 when she did the migration from Mecca to Medina. So Aisha's 10 years younger, puts her at 18. Okay. So what I'm saying is there's a lot of corroborating evidence that points to Aisha being 18 when the Prophet married her. So it either completely discounts this hadith that says she was 6, or we have to then understand what this narrator was saying, in that he was talking about post-puberty, and which was a custom among Arabs and others at the time.
Yeah.
So
certainly.
Bottom line, Aisha wasn't 6. when the Prophet married her, or 9 when consummated the marriage.
Yeah.
She was 18 or older at that time. She was a woman. And another very important one, which is I suppose, a sort of rational, logical evidence, is that the Prophet was only married to a single woman when he was living in Mecca. Her name was Khadija. Mm. The Prophet Muhammad loved Khadija deeply, and she was so important to his his well-being and even his prophethood. Mm. He had 2 very important supporters in his life.
Yeah.
One was Khadija, his wife, and the other was his uncle Abu Talib. And they both passed away in the year 619, which is why in Islamic sources it's referred to as the year of sadness. He was deeply saddened. And it was another lady that came to the Prophet, understood how sad he was, how devastated he was by the death of his wife. And she said to him, "You've got a heavy mission ahead of you. You need to have another supporter." And she suggested someone who can, be by your side and give you advice in the way Khadija did, support you. And so she said, she suggested to her, "What about Abu Bakr's daughter, Aisha?" Mm. Okay. You don't suggest a 6-year-old to be your supporter and all this. You've got this heavy mission of, conveying this new religion to people. Mm. You've got your own tribe wanting to kill you.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. Yeah. But, an intelligent 18-year-old, that does make some sense, right?
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah, gotcha.
Right.
And I asked the question and framed it the way I did, not because I believe that there is this particular issue. I think there is narrative that's an issue, and the reason is because of A, B, C, and D.
Yeah.
Now, and in particular, I had a friend that called me the other day and engaged me in conversation around this, and he grew up in parts of Africa where the faith that was largely practiced was Islam, and he was taught things in their mosque, and he was very, very strong. Now, he's since converted to Christianity, but he was very, very, very strong about, he has read these things himself, he was taught these things himself, and he believes that that's what he said. And I actually asked him a really important question, which was, what you said you read, especially around kind of the narrative around Aisha, was that found in the Quran or was that found in the Hadith? Mm. And so this is, I think, perhaps a book that we need to kind of explore and dig into a little bit further in our next conversation. But I wanted to ask that particular question because it's one of the greatest narratives that people really hold on to, and people get very, very defensive and almost aggressive about their belief and in that understanding that is, if the prophet of this religious belief system fundamentally practiced something that was so outrageous, why would anyone believe or anyone follow it? And why wouldn't it be true that he was such a violent and aggressive and etc. and all of the narrative that comes out of that we've largely explored in this conversation that are largely untrue. And I think we've dealt with some of the modern day understandings and misconceptions around those narratives and some of those anti-Semitic ideologies and pro-Palestine movements that is all occurring at the moment. And I think what I would be really, really interested to do with you in moving into hopefully another conversation sometime soon is talking about, one, let's dive a bit deeper into the Hadith, because I think that book is perhaps quite responsible for a significant amount of the misconceptions.
Well, it's not one book, it's potentially it's thousands of narrations that are compiled into multiple volumes. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Which is why I was going to ask you made a comment earlier that the Bible might be more similar to Hadith, and I was going to ask how so, and I think I have my answer there, in that the Bible is comprised of 66 books that were written over time by different people. Some are prophets, some are poetry, etc. So I think that's the similarity.
If I'm honest with you, I'm probably not interested even talking about the Hadith.
Yeah. Right.
Like, I just don't think it leads to understanding. And I'm about education, understanding. If we're going to spend time talking, that the book we should be talking about is the Quran, in my opinion. I think another issue here is that people are not engaged in conversations and debates because they want to learn.
Yes.
They want a not because they want a mutual understanding or that kind of outcome. They're involved because they want to engage in polemics. They want to prove a point. They want to discredit the other side. They want to feel better about themselves and the choices they've made in terms of their identity, religious or otherwise. I'm much more. I'm not interested in having conversations with people who are dug in on their views and simply, want to engage in these kinds of polemics for those reasons. I'm much more interested in engaging with people that are open-minded. They're curious. They want to learn something. That show me the evidence. Let's debate. Does this make sense? Those are the people I'm prepared to talk to.
And to be quite honest with you, in that conversation, very quickly, once I started to poke holes in some of those narratives, I saw a very, very quick and not so subtle change of heart and not so subtle change of mindset. And I think it's not all that difficult to do if people understand some of the facts and the real context behind things. But I think one of the things that would be really important for me to do as well, and this is what I was saying, that it'd be important for us to look at a conversation where we kind of give an account on both sides. So I have a really good sense of understanding of the Bible and you do of the Quran, and I would love to have conversations where we debate some of the narrations within those books and where they either are at loggerheads, i.e. there might be contradictions, or where they actually do agree, and what that means for the both of us. And so there's a lot of those, and I think one of the first questions might be something along the lines of, from the understanding of the Muslim faith, is the Bible viewed as a holy book similar to what the Quran is?
Yeah. Well, the Quran talks about God conveying a divine message to messengers all throughout human history. Some of these are mentioned: Noah, Abraham, Jesus, for example, are all considered to be messengers of God who conveyed a message to humanity. There are some scriptures that are mentioned. For example, the Psalms of David are mentioned in the Quran. It's mentioned the Injil of Jesus is mentioned in the Quran, which is often translated to gospel.
Gotcha.
The Torah of Moses is mentioned. Okay. But there potentially could be others, but and the Quran doesn't attempt to be an exhaustive list of all the prophets, nor does it or of all the scriptures either.
There's a lot of prophets.
But because that's not the point. But the point is that God has fulfilled God's promise, which is to provide this guidance to humankind. What we do with it is on us. Okay,
cool.
So as far as Bible is concerned, the Quran doesn't endorse the Bible, all of these books and things as being God's word. In fact, what God says is that often it was the scholars or the rabbis and the monks or the priests, depending on the translation that you read, that have put their own words there. They have replaced the words of God with their own words. And this is something that's very much criticized and condemned in the Quran. We spoke about the example before about, this idea that, you've got the permission of God to go and destroy, all inhabitants. What are we talking about here? Innocent men, women, and children? Why should they be killed? This is not God's way. Surely God's way is, allow people at least to hear the message. Let them make decisions for themselves. How they choose to live their lives is really up to them. If they choose to live their life in a way that is consistent with the will of God, well, they'll be rewarded in the afterlife. But if they choose to live their life in a way where they're criminals, oppressors, they violate the rights of other people, then they have a different consequence in the afterlife. But they're accountable to God nonetheless.
Yes. I think I'll end the conversation there, but it's been quite a pleasure chatting with you. I think if society was willing to engage in civil discourse where we can hear thoughts, challenge ideas, understand history, and understand context, I think it will make for a much more robust civilization that really is a pleasure to live within. And I must say, it's certainly been a pleasure chatting with you. I would love to explore some of those in a future conversation with you, which would hopefully leave the both of us with better understanding of ultimately who our God and our Creator is. Because and up until recently, I used to think when you say the word Allah, you're referring to some other third-party God who isn't.
I'm surprised that you would think that.
Right?
I mean, you're a follower of Jesus.
Right.
What language did Jesus speak?
Right.
Aramaic.
Right. Aramaic.
What is the word of God in Aramaic?
Gotcha.
Right. So
it's interesting that we know. So you know these things, but you have some sort of a misconception that is birthed within you from wherever it comes from.
Yeah, I think one of the issues is that forgive me for saying, but Christians have been conditioned particularly here in the West, to think about a version of Christianity that was designed for Europeans. And, that doesn't necessarily align with the actual message that Jesus conveyed.
Yeah.
And I think this is part of the problem. Even the images that you see of Jesus, do not appear to be that of a person from the Middle East where he was from.
Yeah. It's a white guy.
I think people know that he spoke Aramaic, this was his language, but many people are unaware of that.
Yes.
And this is the problem. It's an appropriation of his message and a repackaging of it. And of course, we know that this is what the Roman Empire did.
Yes. Yeah.
And
then there is that problem.
A lot of what is called Christianity is not necessarily the actual message of Jesus, but it's the repackaging of that, by the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
I mean, Council of Nicaea in 325 excluded a whole lot of what was written before then for hundreds of years was accepted about what the teachings of Jesus actually were. No, burnt, destroyed. Can't look at that anymore. This is what you've got to accept. This is problematic.
Yeah.
It's not my problem, but if for a Christian person, this is something that needs to be worked through.
Because now we're missing a whole bunch of text that misses context.
Yeah, to be quite clear, as a Muslim, I have an understanding of my faith. I have a text that I can refer to get all the information and understanding that I need. That is the Quran. And then we've got a long, history of scholarship that has been written over long periods of time that has reflected on the Quran in relation to various changing social, economic, and, political and other circumstances. So we've got a lot to draw on, as other faiths have a lot to draw on as well.
Yeah.
There's a verse towards the end of the Quran where it says, "Lakum dinakum waliyadin," unto me my way and unto you yours. So, we understand our religion. Well, most of us do, and we follow that religion. Yeah. But within that says that you also have your religion. Yeah. Go ahead and follow it. Yeah. And do the best job of it that you can. You recognize Jesus as having a message that came from God that he conveyed. Follow it to the best of your ability. And if we follow our message to the best of our ability, we aren't going to have a problem with each other because both of our faiths say that we should live with the diversity that God created.
Yes.
And that diversity is in our languages, it's in our colors, it's in the lands in which we live, but it's also in what we believe and what we don't believe. And we can tolerate that. We can accept that we don't believe the same things.
Yes.
But we must be respectful to one another. We must speak appropriately with one another. We must not speak hatefully to one another.
Yeah.
And everybody must feel secure from the hand of everybody else. Yeah. Those people who seek to do violence against others, this is completely unacceptable in my religion, and I think it's completely unacceptable in yours. If we can agree on that, we can coexist.
That's a good start.
No, without any issue.
It's a very, very good
without
start.
any issue.
Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been wonderful. I really hope that we can have another conversation. And I certainly hope that on both sides that this conversation has seek to further unite humanity more than cause division. And I think we can all agree that if there is a common enemy that we all have is that the Satan who is bent on destroying us. And well, the only way it can really do that is get us to do that to each other, right?
Exactly.
So that's what we must war against every day of our lives.
Correct.
But otherwise, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks.
And I look forward to seeing what happens next in our other conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
For those who are out there, do remember that you should subscribe and follow. And if you want more conversations like these that challenge the narratives that you have, and you're okay with that fact, because you should be, because we don't know everything. I don't know everything. Neither does Halim, and neither does any person on this earth can claim to know everything except God. And ultimately, if that's whom we serve, then we must seek righteousness and we must seek the good of each other at all times.